Welcome back to our Metal Gear episode of downloadable content. I'm still here, Ben's still here, Ron's still here. I don't think we hit a fish and mailed.
No, everybody's still here.
Everyone's still here? No fish and mailed screens. That's good. Yes, I'll explain fish and mailed in a little bit,
It'll
Ron.
it'll come up. Don't worry.
Yeah. So we've discussed the first few Metal Gear games, Metal Gear 1, 2, Snake's Revenge, and the first Metal Gear Solid game, which sets the stage for Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty.
I there's a little bit of backstory that's not particularly well known that I'd like to kind of bring up here, just because I think it helps as an establishment of sort of what they were trying to do with Metal Gear Solid 2.
Go ahead.
I don't know how 100% accurate that is, but apparently very early on in the design process when they were getting together, Kojima got his team back together and said that they were going to make the second game in this part of the series called Metal Gear Solid 3, not Metal Gear Solid 2, and they would just skip the number 2 completely. And when asked why, the response was essentially along the lines of, because it will confuse people, which was, of course, quickly shot down because...
Sounds like Kojima, so
Yes!
Yeah.
it doesn't surprise me too much.
The thing that most people, the two things that most people take from this game is, number one, they were unhappy with the fact that they didn't get to play as Solid Snake. You play as another character named Raiden. And number two, the story was so just bizarre. It's just to a lot of, it's not even that it's necessarily just difficult to follow just for the sake of being, it's just plain weird in a lot of places. And in some cases, it feels like it's difficult to follow just for the sake of being difficult to follow. When it was extremely well reviewed, there was a lot of hype, especially considering how well the first game had done. And this was this big upgrade from PlayStation to PlayStation 2. There were a lot of trailers and things shown for it, and again a very high aggregate score, probably about 94, 95. Once again, 7 million worldwide copies, multiple Game of the Year awards, and this was in 2001. Was it 2001? It was 2001. So it wasn't like there was nothing else that came out that year, but it was just sort of a situation where everybody really sort of loved the gameplay and the visuals, but everybody was sort of wondering what the hell was going on with the story. It's very convoluted. It's very unusual, and it's not helped by the fact that you do play as another main character. Now, Kojima had very good reasons for this. He wanted people to sort of experience things through a little bit of a different set of eyes, and that's where Raiden comes into the game. But part of the problem is he was so sharply contrasted from Snake that a lot of people really didn't like him. I remember when I started playing the game, I got to the segment, for the first beginning part, you do play as Snake, and then a short while and you transition over to being Raiden. And I remember saying to one of my friends about, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 hours into the game, I said, yeah, it's great so far. I just really can't wait till I get to go back to being Snake. And his response was, well...
Can we bring Eris back from the dead?
Yeah.
Sort of that. Now, I don't know if, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember that all of the advertising for this game, all the trailers and whatnot, only showed Snake.
They did.
That was the point. That was part of the marketing, was because they wanted people to think that you're still going to be playing as Snake.
And, I'm playing through this game, and, I remember seeing the advertisement, all Snake, all the time, yeah, good Snake, I'm going to kill things, here you go. And then, 4 or 5 hours into the game, shifts gears, and now you're playing as Raiden, and you're like, what?
That's completely accurate. They all the trailers. The game is broken up obviously into these two sections, and almost all of the trailers and cutscenes originally shown were taken from the first section when you're Snake. The very few that were shown from the second section when you play as Raiden were digitally altered to include Snake instead of Raiden. Snake's on the box cover, Snake's on the disc, Snake's on the original title screen. The title screen shifts after you beat the game, of course, but... Well, not of course. It shifts after you beat the game so that you, now get a more realistic view of who you're actually going to be playing as during the game. But, everything was kind of led to make you believe that you were playing as Snake. And that was the intention. The problem was that that threw off a lot of people. They wanted to play as Snake. They didn't want to play as Raiden.
They did. Kojima did one massive fool you, and it didn't help the fact of the type of character that Raiden was. Raiden was a very whiny prat. Number one.
He was indecisive. He was not the hero, the character that people were used to playing as, I think if people had said, okay, well, you're not playing as Snake, you're playing as this other guy, and he's a badass of a totally different order, I think it would have taken a lot better. If you look at something like Devil May Cry 4, where it was, okay, you're not necessarily only playing as Dante, you're playing as this other guy, and true, he wasn't as cool as Dante. I didn't like him as much, but it wasn't like
he was a whiny prat that needed name tags sewn in his underwear.
Yeah,
well, the other guy at least had a little bit of flair to him as well, and he eventually grew into being his own style of badass.
He was a whiny prat, and yes,
and again, combine that with a story that sort of made most people go, "What?" Huh? It really just did not. And then almost the worst part was that we had to wait until we had to wait until 2008. We had to wait 7 years before getting kind of some of the story ends tied up.
Yes,
just because the next game in the series, which we'll come to, was a prequel to the entire series. So any lingering questions were not resolved immediately.
No.
By no means was Kojima in a rush, but we touched on this a little earlier. This is really this game featured a sequence that sort of took the idea behind the Psycho Mantis scene and ran with it so far above and beyond. There's a section where the game is actively messing with you. You will get prank calls on your radio. The game will at various points tell you to shut down the console. It's sort of. The game does a lot of things to try and disorient and confuse the player, and that was, I guess, part of the idea was, okay, you're taken out of your element, so that's where the idea of not playing as Snake comes in, and that's where the idea of maybe messing with the numbering scheme just to sort of confuse people comes in. He wanted to keep people a little off guard, and just make people feel a little uncomfortable, and that was.
And I'm going to cut in here too, saying this is where I'm going to say we insert the cool moments in gaming history here because it's relevant for Metal Gear Solid 2.
Go ahead.
Because the whole reason why he's doing that is because it's part of the big reveal of Metal Gear Solid 2. You playing as Raiden, you're not really on this damn oil rig. You are in a virtual reality simulator, and this is all this weird shit happening to you is Oudkon and Solid Snake trying to get you free from this damn machine.
Spoiler alert, by the way.
And
small spoilers, it's fine.
It's only small, slightly spoiled.
The game has been out for over a decade, I think.
Statute of limitations should have expired by now.
Yes.
And so, like, the whole reason why these weird things are happening to you is because it's the story elements trying to keep you uneasy, so that way when this mind fuck does eventually happen, you're like, okay, that sort of almost explains things.
Oh, I was kept uneasy. I remember that very, very much, especially when, the Colonel comes on and starts spouting off the names of Japanese train stations at me. It was just, I'm like, oh my god, this is, best line, though, in that whole game was that I think it's amazing when the purple stuffed worm in Flapjaw space does a raw blink on Harry Kiri Rock. I need scissors, 61.
Yeah, when you're getting calls like that from your commanding officer in the middle of a sequence, and that was the other thing, that whole scene is just totally designed to make players feel as uneasy as possible. Raiden is literally stripped of his equipment. He's left running around, it's the ultimate in totally stealth moments. You are completely
naked.
I don't know if I call you stealthy when you're completely fucking nude, but
yeah, you are completely naked. You have no weapons. You have nothing. You still have to, anybody who would have gotten used to, and this was really the first game in the series where Kojima gave you the option to be stealthy, non-lethal. You were given a tranquilizer gun at the beginning of the game.
That's right. I forgot about that. You're given the M9.
And you're given, there's a priority given of putting guards to sleep rather than shooting them, because if you put a guard to sleep and another guard sees him, they'll just wake up the guy who's asleep. But if they see a guy who's been shot, they'll call for backup. So
yeah, you'll trigger the alert mode.
This was really sort of the beginning of their ultimate exercise and restraint for this title. Is you can't attack anybody because you don't have a weapon with which to attack them. You still have to get around guards. You still have to get around security cameras. You now literally, offense is not an option. It's only stealth. So this whole sequence was just completely bizarre and completely, you don't really know what's going on. You're starting to feel uneasy. You don't know who to trust. You don't know, it just becomes a complete... At this point, you've also been betrayed by the only ally you thought you had in the game, although that ends up being a cover anyway. It's just sort of a very...
Mr. Pliskin.
Yeah, it's a very, very off-putting one in gaming.
Iroquois Pliskin.
Yeah, I like that one. More movie references.
I also like the... my headband gives me infinite bullets.
Yeah,
fourth wall humor again. Yes.
Yeah. Which was nice that he actually decided which was the real ending for the first game, because of course there were two endings there. But I mean, also of course the similarities to the first game was something that put off people a little bit, although that was very, very intentional as explained in the story. It still kind of rubbed some people the wrong way. So it was just. If you hear people talk negatively about the series, in a lot of cases, not all, and legitimately not all, this is a big reason why the series necessarily didn't catch on as big as it could have, because a lot of people were very hyped about this game, and then it actually came out, and people were just sort of left scratching their heads. They didn't want to deal with the overly long cutscenes. They didn't want to deal with the sort of postmodern story. They didn't want to deal with the whole... There was a lot of things that they just didn't want to deal with.
You know what I didn't want to deal with?
What's that?
Rose.
Yeah, I mean...
Can I rant here for a short bit?
Sure.
We haven't been ranting enough already.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me rant a bit here. I'm trying, my wife is watching me play through the entire Metal Gear series. And we did finish the first game, and now we're on the second game. She kind of wants to pound both Raiden and Rose's face in. Because, one of the things that put people off was the melodrama. It's all part and parcel of the whole plot line and, the postmodernist type of game that it was. But, just these long cutscenes. Well, do you remember what day it is? Why don't you remember what day it is, Jack? Jack!
You know where that actually all came from? They were modeled after arguments Kojima had actually had with his wife.
Yes, you've told me that. But... a lot of the characters in this game, I mean, after you play as Snake and you get into these characters, you're like, okay, good, the Colonel, the Colonel, you remember him from the first game, great, Colonel's cool. And the Colonel starts speaking disparages, Snake, and you're like, wait a minute, something's off. But... just the whole melodrama of the codec scenes between Raiden and Rose, and I'm just... I know it's all part of the plot, but oh my god.
Yeah, it's not a lot of people's... I mean, Raiden and Rose are not a lot of people's favorite characters, which is something that he went to great lengths to try to adjust in the fourth game, which... we'll get to when we get there.
Yes.
But, I mean, at least, the nice thing I can say about that is at least, you have to give him credit for... We always wail on people for not taking risks and playing it safe with titles. You have to give Kojima credit for trying a character who was so different from the hero that people were expecting. And a large part of it was, again, that he needed somebody who was so drastically different from Snake. And Snake would have been much more decisive and wouldn't have put up with that kind of, melodrama or anything like that. And yeah, I mean, Snake's relationship problems are fairly well documented throughout the series, when they're actually even touched upon. He doesn't connect with people easily. That's why Otacon is kind of such a big deal. But, I mean, there was the big idea was that you have a major fundamental shift from Snake to Raiden, and that includes things like, emphasis on the dart guns and, just the whole... having other characters and having a support staff that are really going to engage with you and not just want to talk about the mission that you have a personal connection with and things like that. Yes, I'm not saying I necessarily enjoyed all of that, but I appreciate the depth that was at least put into those characters and, the fact that he was willing to go so far to give us a completely different and yet shockingly similar gameplay experience was kind of cool to just really literally see the same game twice from a different perspective.
Also, something that I had not seen yet in a video game, because I obviously had played Sons of Liberty before I played Eternal Darkness, was the fission mailed screen, which was jarring. I mean, it takes place during the whole what the fuck, ass naked riding part of the game.
Do you want to explain what that actually is? Because we've mentioned it a few times, we haven't gone into it yet. So
I will. Yes, fission mailed. During the course of play, during this whole what the fuck section of the game that Ron mentioned, you'll be fighting. You might be in alert mode, or you're trying to run away from some guards, and the screen will just immediately cut to the game over screen for Raiden. It cuts to black, and just in your upper right corner of the screen, you would normally see dead Raiden. However, during this part of the game, it would just immediately cut to the game over screen, but there's still action going on in the upper. You're still controlling the play in the upper right screen, and instead of mission failed, the screen says fission mailed. In one of the many ways that the game tries to fuck with you in the last part of the toward the end of it, which when I first saw that, I'm thinking, oh, game over, restart. Wait a minute! Wait a minute! I'm still controlling the game. What the fuck is this?
Yeah, like you said, it's the close to the Eternal Darkness type thing where you would kind of just have the game.
In hindsight, I was waiting for, in hindsight, thinking about that, I'm just waiting for Raiden to scream, "This isn't really happening!" And
exactly. I mean, again, it's sort of self-referential humor, and that's all sort of explained and brought up for how this is all happening. And the only problem was just the plot twists just got to be too much. It almost would have been, and I mean, again, it was keep people off guard, but it got to the point for me where I literally, at one point during one of the reveals, I put the controller down. I was like, nope, I am done. Anything else that happens, I am just ignoring the cutscenes. I'm just going to play the game, and I will read online what the hell I just watched, because I am not bothering to try and even figure it out at this point.
All right,
it really just became a lot. And even like I said, I'm a big fan of the series, and even for me, it just became sort of too much. So I certainly appreciate that it's there for the for the gameplay elements, and even there were scenes later on. There's where later on in Metal Gear Solid 4 they actually kind of had to backtrack and retcon a few things from Metal Gear Solid 2 because they were just so outrageous that they really just painted themselves in a corner and had no way to sort of solve things. So they threw in a little bit of a Deus Ex Machina to clear up a few things from the second game, and I think that was kind of an admission of, all right, maybe we took this a little too far. But again, got to give them praise for trying.
Yes, and finally, then 3 years later, in November 2004, we would move on to a game that actually had some semblance of clarity.
Some being the key word.
Some. It was, I feel like that was probably... I mean, the thing about with Snake Eater was, first of all, it was a James Bond movie. I mean, it was really... You want to talk about...
Let's call it what it is.
It was supposed to be a James Bond. It was supposed to be if Hideo Kojima could direct
it is a James Bond pastiche.
With Solid Snake, which was done very well. Which was done very, very well.
Complete with the music and everything.
The music, even the early trailers were done up like movie trailers. With the green, the following preview has been approved for all audiences. That was really nice. There was a theme song that would play at various key moments, and I think the problem with that was more you had to be up on the current events of the time, which the game is set in the 60s, 64, I want to say. Is that right? 1964.
I will confirm that in a second.
Anyway, so it wasn't so much that you needed to be up on series lore as you needed to be up on
yes, it was in 1964. You are
world
correct.
Lore, and the game did a really good job of sort of bringing you up to speed on that. They did. This was you got to introduce a young Revolver Ocelot, which was kind of a cool thing to see him come full circle and transition as the game is going through.
I also like the slight time paradox thing.
Yes, for those of you who didn't play it, there were certain scenes in the game where you could alter the course of history by, say, killing another character, or of course, if you died, and if Big Boss, the character you played as, Big Boss, died, then obviously the rest of the series wouldn't have happened, and you know, things just nothing would have occurred. So you get yelled at by a future version of the Colonel that you've created a time paradox, which was really kind of an interesting, and even became a gameplay
That was
mechanic at one
wasn't
point.
that the game over screen?
That was
Yeah,
game over screen.
Game over screen was time paradox. Yeah.
It said time paradox.
Yep. Although there is there's a scene where you can kill Revolver Ocelot, and what I thought this was really nice, and another nod to the series' trademark humor. You if you kill him in the Metal Gear Solid HD collection, you get a trophy on the PlayStation version and obviously the Xbox version that says "Problem solved, series over."
Forgot about that one.
That's great.
Yeah,
I mean,
they know their target audience, and what was big about the third one was that it was kind of seen as a nice amp up in difficulty. Was instead of being in these urban environments, you are now in a jungle. And they really started using a lot of motion capture and actual military training so that the guards behaved like realistic guards would, and they moved like guards really would in a in this kind of environment. And being a prequel really freed it from a lot of the conventions of the earlier games.
Yes.
They were able to establish a much, I don't want to say necessarily clearer story, but I guess an easier to follow story.
Well,
because
when you have when you've already declared that this game is going to be the prequel to the entire series, that does give you a lot of creative freedom.
yeah,
Obviously you can't ignore the events of Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 because those happen.
Yeah, and I also have the idea of establishing certain series principles that may carry on beforehand. For example, the Metal Gear thing. No, it's not some random tank idea that came around in the 80s. This thing was made in the 1960s.
Well, the game takes place, Ben, you were correct, it does take place during the Cold War in 1964. Where at the time, Big Boss, he's known as Naked Snake in the game, he is a member of he works for the CIA.
Yep, no secret government agencies or anything like that. Just the actual regular CIA.
And he was, he did his thing, and the funny thing was, Ben, when after Metal Gear Solid 2 came out, and after both me and my stepbrother had played it and beaten it, my stepbrother said, for the next game, I would love for them to make a game where it takes place in the jungle. 3 years later,
there you go.
3 years later, and then it's 60 some odd years in the past.
3 years later, yeah, and
Or 40. I'm sorry.
I mean, it's we see this all the time whenever there's a movie sequel. A perfect example would be with the recent, or prequel rather, or the recent Star Wars prequels. When you do a sequel, your beginning is sort of defined, and your world is kind of already set up, and you have to live within that. And the ending is maybe a little bit open, but if it's part of an ongoing series, the end isn't even really so open. But when you do a prequel, your whole beginning is opened up. You just have to get somewhere by the end. And the nice thing was there's such a big time gap between Metal Gear Solid 3 and the original Metal Gear Solid that they didn't have to kind of close the gap on everything, and there were more games between those two, but it was the sort of thing where again they had the freedom from all of their crazy government conspiracies and everything else that's going on, but they still have to litter the ground with the breadcrumbs of, okay, this is how we're going to get where you've come into the series before. This is the precursor to the Metal Gears that you're familiar with. This is how this character was named. This is where this idea in the franchise came from. So it was really nice and very different from a story perspective. And for most people, and for me as well, it's looked at as the best game in the series.
I can agree with that. I can definitely agree with that. I mean, as you mentioned, there's a lot more. It's a lot more military realistic. This was the first game to introduce CQC, for example. You had you had an added. I mean, stealth was always very important, but you had an added layer of importance with the camo index.
Yep. This time you couldn't just. It wasn't just about. It was about how well you could disguise yourself and hide in the jungle. You had to. You had to keep food. And you had to not let that food go bad. The game would play off of the system clock, and if you kept food for too long, it would spoil and you couldn't eat it.
Which I thought was such an interesting game mechanic because I was playing this game and I saved it and I hadn't picked it up again for a week or so. and I turn the game back on, and I'm like, okay, well, Snake's, low on health. I'll just grab, this alligator that I killed. And I see Snake's health drop. And I'm like, what the? And I'm like, oh my god. The game kept use the system clock, and all the food spoiled.
Yep. You also had to heal yourself if you got injured, which was a nice touch. Instead of just, like in most
Rations.
games, okay, I'll just have some health pack or whatever it is and be fine. In this game, if you broke your leg, you would see that affect Snake until you went in and actually, actually would apply some medical treatment to it. Yeah, exactly. The series trademark sort of bosses were kind of back, although they didn't really have enough of an established backstory, which is something that unfortunately would continue in the fourth game. But they had some relevance, which was kind of cool. They, there was one of the best series bosses in the Sorrow, which just because of the way he was sort of built up. This was a game that also introduced
who that line gets to.
Yeah. Wait, what line?
I'm trying to think, because they mention, Ocelot.
Oh, yeah, that whole, they actually managed to tie in and make sense out of some of the more ridiculous gameplay elements or plot elements from the second game, which was nice. That also, introduced a more higher importance on not killing guards, which I thought was a really cool trick. This was the game that introduced the Keratin, or whatever they were called, the dolls, the frogs that you had to find one in each area and shoot all of them for special rewards, which I thought was kind of a neat mechanic. You had a vehicle section for the first time in the series, which was kind of which is something they'd been trying to do for the first few games, but just couldn't really fit it in. It was a lot of big things, and also kind of a cool mechanic that made its way back to the series. You could hold the first-person view button during certain cutscenes, and see what Snake sees, and give a different perspective on things. And sometimes it was just silly humor, but other times it was, important information. It was definitely. I feel like, with the first game, they only had the opportunity to make the one game for the PlayStation, and then with the second game, they were focused so much on getting it out, close to launch and getting it done quickly. With the third game, they really had their time to sort of put in all these fun little extras and really make a very well-rounded game. And then with Metal Gear Solid 4, again, it was their first title for the PlayStation 3, and they had a series to wrap up, so it became less about sort of what's fun and what's cool, and more about what they had to do and saying what they had to say. But not that it wasn't a good game. It was just a very different approach.
That's very true, and also, this being the prequel, it laid down, your antagonists for the series. Some of your characters that you thought were relatively minor end up being major series protagonists.
Yeah.
Or antagonists.
Yep. And of course, the story was just unbelievable. I mean, there's a scene near the end that I just don't want to spoil. That Brian, which one I'm talking about. It was just so heart wrenching and so hard to watch. And Kojima, in typical fashion, decides to make it transition between an interactive movie, where there's a scene where you have to commit an action. And it's like everything's like, okay, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, and it's cutscene. And then because everything is just rendered back through the regular game engine, it very seamlessly transitions back to, okay, now you're in a gameplay section, and you actually have to hit the button for this to happen. And I thought that was just a beautiful, beautiful moment. That's probably, if I had to pick a cool moment, that would be mine from this particular game. Just the way that was ending. It was so hard to watch and just so beautifully executed.
I'll agree with that. That was definitely very heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
Although I wouldn't start sobbing until Metal Gear Solid 4.
Well, I mean, that was a little different. I didn't say I was it was just, it's hard. I mean, and that's what's good about this is these are characters. This isn't even, you could say, well, this is the third game in the series where we've had with these characters. No, in most cases, this was, these were all mostly characters that were introduced in this title. So it wasn't even like we'd had any real connection. And just during the course of this action, you really just learn to connect and deal with these characters, and that was what was so cool about the game.
I thought the little nod to Raiden was amusing.
Yeah, Kojima had some fun with that. The fans' reaction to Raiden resulted in not very popular character in the third game, with a not so subtle name. But
Like Rydenovsky, I don't know what the
Rykov, I think it was.
Rykov's, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else to say about the third game, or should we transition into?
I think we're gonna head into Metal Gear Solid 4 unless you had anything else to add, Ron.
No.
I got nothing. Sorry.
He's like, I'll pass. All right. 4 years would go by.
Almost
4 years, and then we get to June 2008. And Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots is now released for the PlayStation 3. And the first thing I noticed, Snake's old.
He's very old.
He is very old. This was a plot element, but it was also partially an intentional design choice by Kojima to part with Snake. And they made it very clear before the game was even released that this was going to be the last game in the series with Snake in it, and in fact the last Metal Gear Solid. While they are continuing the series with other games, I think he said that he wanted to kind of make this the last Metal Gear Solid title with Snake in it, the last numbered Metal Gear Solid title.
Yep. And I mean, they explain it very well because Snake, even by Metal Gear Solid 4, his age is not considered old. I forget how old he is in the game, but externally he's aging because of plot elements in the previous games. Les enfants terribles, and my horrible French, but that's okay.
It's all right. That's probably about how accurately it's said throughout the entirety of the series. So,
the first thing and you could tell. The game was set, the tone of the game was set right from the first line. War has changed. And you're like, ooh, this is going to set itself up to be a pretty dark game.
Yeah.
I mean they're all very serious in tone, but this one I kind of got the sense that this is going to be probably the darkest of the bunch.
And the setting especially. I mean, it's all of the trailers and cutscenes were shown like really all three games post Metal Gear Solid. This was a title that took place in sort of more than one area, with gaps in time, short gaps this time, but you all of the cutscenes and trailers were shown with a Middle Eastern setting, and especially considering the time and sort of the hostilities and actions there, it really touched with a lot of people. And that is where the beginning of the game takes place. You're on, a very, it's supposed to be an unnamed Middle Eastern country. You're on a battlefield there. You're constantly, as you're walking around, there is a lot of, there's a lot of people dying. There's a lot of heavy action around you. And this is something that continues on for most of the game, is, there's a lot of NPC soldier deaths around you on both sides, even if you don't kill a single person, trust me, you will see plenty of other people get shot and killed. And it's really, like Brian said, it is a much darker tone than I think the other games go for. That's not to say it doesn't have some humorous moments, but it's much more sort of, okay, this is our this is where we're ending. This is how we have to kind of pull everything together, and it's really pretty ugly when you look at it.
It's this. I mean, it is. They don't actually tell you where the game actually begins, but it definitely is in the Middle East somewhere. And even though Snake looks old, he still has it. He's still got it.
Yeah, he still manages to kill a good number of people.
And by this point, I mean, this picks up now where I forget the length of time that passes between Metal Gear Solid 2 and 4.
I want to say like 10, 15 years.
I don't even think it's that. Let's see. I think they said it.
It's 5 years after Metal Gear Solid 2.
Yeah, there you go.
So, I mean, take a look at... I mean, you saw the youthful appearance of Snake in Metal Gear Solid 2. Now, go forward 5 years and look at Snake then. He looks like he's aged 40 years.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, they do explain why. It's not just some throwaway. They do actually pretty much go into...
There's a reason for it, but...
definitely a reason for that. I mean, we see the return of our beloved characters, Otacon, the Colonel, and we get Raiden back.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that when people knew that Raiden was going to be in this game, they were like, "Oh no, oh dear."
To be fair, when you see Raiden come back, two
He
things
looks
go
a
through.
hell of a lot
Yeah,
different.
yeah. Two things go through your head. Wow, that's Raiden, and wow, I guess I know who the ninja is in this game.
I'm like, did he and Gray Fox get together? And but yeah, Raiden has almost a complete 180 in terms of personality.
You have to give them credit for really responding to sort of the fans' reaction of how poorly received he was in the game, and really deciding to kind of, okay, well, let's make people like him again, or make people like him, since again really wasn't an option. He was never really all that liked in the first place.
Yes. But in terms of gameplay, I mean, it still keeps the stealth in play. The camo index is important. However, you can have ally NPCs. I mean, obviously not with you throughout the course of the game, but they will help take down, enemy NPCs, on the battlefield. They will not turn on you. I mean, I think this is probably the first Metal Gear game which I played in which not everyone on your screen is an enemy.
Yeah, it's interesting how you can go through a war zone as long as you're dressed appropriately. One side or the other will not shoot at you, which is kind of nice.
Which is very, very nice. And it does this game does wrap up quite a lot of the story, I think. I mean, we wrap up Meryl. We wrap up Naomi. We wrap up Snake, really.
Yeah.
I do not want to give you the ending. Just letting you know that I sobbed all the way through that.
Yeah, I mean, that was a long cutscene, though.
That was very long, and yes, I lost it at that point.
Yeah.
And you could tell also by just by the way the game was looked, how much attention to detail in graphics they gave.
Oh, I mean, it was unbelievable. It looked beautiful. It was, which is good because it was kind of a long game to be staring at all those cutscenes. But they really, I mean, the thing that really just impresses me is how open and how big the game really manages to feel. It's even when you were in the jungle, the areas were decently sized, but you didn't necessarily feel as open and as free as you did in a lot of other places. I still remember when I'd play through Metal Gear Solid 3, a lot of times just because of the guards' routes, I'd end up taking basically the same path most of the way through. And that takes away a degree of difficulty, and that takes a degree of uncertainty from the game, whereas here, it feels like whichever way you go, the game reacts a little bit differently. So instead of trigger timed sequences happening the exact same way every single time, depending on the route you take and depending on the outfit you're wearing, different guards will spawn in different places, and that makes you rethink your approach time and time again.
One of the things, I enjoyed about the game was the merchant, Drebin, and
Very nice.
yeah, I don't know if you've seen enough of the game, Ron, to know who Drebin is.
No, I do not.
Kind of looks like Chris Rock, and
okay.
he is he's there not only to provide you with ammunition. He kind of fills the function as the merchant in Resident Evil 4.
Alrighty.
But he also provides you with a lot of backstory, especially with the bosses you have to face, specifically the Beauty and the Beast Core.
Ooh.
So he does provide you with a lot of backstory, and he has a pet with him, so which is also nice. But
Yeah, that was cute.
I also loved, you kind of could tell that this would be the last game Snake would be in because of all the throwbacks. There's a section of the game where you do play in Shadow Moses.
Yep, that was a nice thing.
I'm like, aww, how nice.
Cute how they brought it back together.
Yeah, brought it all back, and the story does wrap itself up with a nice final boss battle against Ocelot.
Yeah, that was well done. The way they kind of somebody put it best. It's everything the fourth game in a series should be, because it manages to tie up all of its loose ends, but it's very, very steeped in its own rich lore, and that's exactly what it really needed to be to kind of wrap everything up.
I think it did. I think it wrapped up the series nicely, and it gives Snake a good send off, and I would be perfectly content if the series ended there. I got the same sort of feeling after the end of Resident Evil 5 run, where I'm just like, okay, all of the major plot points have been resolved. I can be content if there were no more Resident Evil games.
Yeah, I mean, ideally most people will want a story to be kept resolved and complete.
However, we have a cash cow to deal with here.
And people like slicing off chunks of meat.
Yes. So the series, Metal Gear Solid, the story wraps up there. However, because it's Konami and because Metal Gear is a cash cow, we have filler games.
Woo!
We have filler games. I know there's, I'm not going to get into much discussion about the Metal Gear Acid series, the spin-offs, but there were two PSP titles that are officially considered part of the canon. Portable Ops and Peace Walker. Portable Ops, which I have completely played and beaten. Peace Walker I do own. I've just started that. Portable Ops takes place after Metal Gear Solid 3, in which you have, you have to recruit people to fight with you. Hooray. You have a very, very young Roy Campbell. And, that game was kind of sort of meh, I thought, because it didn't have, this was the first Metal Gear game which you had to have a party. It was always, Snake always operated by himself. Here you actually needed recruits, which I felt was just, a little odd. But that's just me. I don't know if you've ever actually played these.
I played the. I briefly played Portable Ops. I think I literally maybe played about the first 10 minutes of it. I really didn't get into any of the recruiting stuff, but I didn't have a PSP at the time when it came out. I still don't own one. It still sort of turned me off to most of the idea of having to do stuff like that. But I mean, I can understand that. Listen, they want to try different things, and you want to, they want to experiment and see where else they can take the series, and you have to try different things, especially on a portable platform. They're gonna sort of, for whatever reason, portable game consoles seem to be known for more experimental titles. You look at the DS's lineup and you look at the PSPs as well. There are more sort of out there titles. I guess they figure it's safer to take that risk, or maybe it's lower budget costs, or whatever the reason. And I think that may have been a result of something like this. Now, obviously, it was a popular enough mechanic that I believe this stayed over and went into Peace Walker as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So there you go. They were maybe also trying out and seeing how it would work in future titles. It may have also had some kind of impact on the online component that they eventually put in, just because you never know. They may have wanted to try out and see, okay, well, how is this going to work? Is this going to be something that we can do? Is this feasible? What's happening?
Well, there you go. So, those are the two PSP games that are officially considered part of the game canon. And so the last thing we will discuss in this episode is the future.
Ooh.
Yes, we will discuss the future. Now that the Metal Gear Solid series has essentially wrapped itself up, we are going to talk about a game that is currently in development, Metal Gear Rising.
Yep. So this was going to be a kind of spin-off It will be a game starring Raiden as in his ninja form. Story-wise, I think they said it's somewhere between. I think it takes place a little bit after the second game, but more after the fourth game, if I read that correctly.
It has since been modified. This game is going to take place after Metal Gear Solid 4.
Okay, so then there you go. So it's the kind of thing where they're trying to take a less popular character and make him sort of more popular. And Kojima's had varying levels of involvement with the title, and I think I think this could be something where it could be a very fun actiony title. That's sort of really more of what they're going for with the new developer.
Yeah, they're leaning more to the hack and slash. We're dispensing with stealth here.
Yeah, I mean, and that's fine too. Although I think they said you could be stealthy if you really wanted to, but from what I understand, they really sort of are leaning towards more of the actiony, crazy stuff, which is fun. It should be an interesting title. The problem is we really don't know that much about it. We've seen only a few brief snippets, and one of them was very recently released, and that was a big shift from what we had been seeing from it.
Right, and when I saw the trailer at the Spike Video Game Awards, I was just impressed at how quickly the action was.
Yeah, it was very. I remember remarking to, I think it was Nick at one point when I was watching the trailers for Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, that I was going to need to watch the movie in slow motion to be able to keep up with what was happening, and I kind of got the same sense watching this trailer for various points of, okay, what the hell? How do they expect the human eye to be able to follow most of this action?
Yeah, I mean, originally it was called Metal Gear Solid Rising. They have since removed the solid from the title, which I thought was a good idea.
Yep. Now it's Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, I believe.
Revengeance, yes.
Yep.
Let's invent words.
Yep. Yeah, why not?
Let us invent words and see what that does. So, I mean, it's not officially part of, at this point, it's not officially part of the Metal Gear series canon. Right now it is considered a spin-off. But we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, again, it's sort of... The other nice thing about it being a spin-off is it frees them a little bit from sort of the constraints of the world, although, if anything, it seems like they're going to be making things a little bit crazier than usual, rather than going for a more toned-down title, but we'll see what they decide to do.
I mean, I expect that there might be a little bit of plot connections between, this and the Metal Gear Solid series, but not a lot. I don't expect them to focus too heavily on that. I expect this to be the Raiden show.
Yeah, and that would make sense. Again, it's they probably want to pull the focus off of Snake as much as possible. If Snake's going to show up, it's going to be a cameo, and nothing else.
If this takes place a few years after Metal Gear Solid 4, he might be dead.
Yeah, he very well could be.
Yeah, Snake might be dead at this point. So
yeah, who knows? Very possible.
But Metal Gear Solid Rising looks interesting. I don't know what to make of it yet. Obviously, it's still very early in development. Again, slated. We have a release date of 2012.
Yeah, and even that's probably subject to change.
That's all we know. Is that at some point this year we'll have
Possibly.
this game. But even then, it is being made. Kojima does. He is playing the role of executive producer.
Yeah, so it's his. It's still his baby. It's still his franchise. He's got to be involved on some level.
He is, and Ryan will have the same voice actor.
Of course he will.
Of course, Quentin Flynn confirmed it.
Good.
But, yeah, I wouldn't want anyone else to play him. We have him. We're stuck with him.
Yeah. Exactly.
And really, there we go. We'll see what. Well, as this game gets further along in development, we'll definitely hear more about it, and we'll go from there. We'll see if it's a title worth buying. So.
Hopefully, it ends up being something at least entertaining. I thought it was the developer behind Bayonetta that took over it now. Platinum Games.
Yes, Platinum
is that correct?
Games.
So I mean, listen, that was a fun game. That's hopefully this will produce something that's worth looking at. But we'll find out hopefully by the end of the year. And hey, who knows? Maybe there'll even be a Maybe this will be a multi-platform release.
We'll see, because right now it's for PS3 and 360. That is the slated systems. Who knows? Maybe we'll get a Wii U release.
Yeah, there you go. Why not? Listen, stranger things have happened.
Yes. All right. So, we've had our cool moments in video games. You brought up two of them. The what the fuckery in Metal Gear Solid 2.
And then, of course, the scene near the end of the third game that we don't want to spoil,
That we
just
don't
for
want
those of you who haven't seen it.
that we don't want to spoil. Yes. I think for my own cool moments in video games are a couple of the more hilarious ones. Ben, you'll know it just by me uttering the name Johnny.
Oh yeah, poor guy with diarrhea.
Yeah, that's basically it, Ron. I don't know if you've heard of Johnny.
I know of him, the poor man who seems to always have a bathroom accident whenever Snake's around.
The shits. Yeah.
Although his father seems to have fared much better in the third game.
Yeah. Although the fourth game, oh my god.
Yeah, that poor guy. That poor guy.
Oh, and
I don't know if I call that a cool moment in video game history as so much as it is an amusing moment.
well,
Yeah.
still, it is a moment that sticks out.
Oh yeah, does it stick out?
I think we should be glad that smell-o-vision has not been invented yet.
Yeah.
Thank God. All right. So I think we've gone through the main Metal Gear series pretty well. I mean, if there's any final points you guys want to add, if not, we're going to put this to bed.
No, I think we've covered most of what we'd want to talk. I mean, it's the kind of thing we could probably, devote 2 full episodes to just talking about the series. It's a very unique series. It's really interesting. There's this big, cult following behind it. Again, as evidenced by the fact that his works are currently in the Smithsonian. And it's really just. It's interesting that that a series that's so polarizing still manages to get so much hype behind it.
Yes, I mean, for all of its political plot points and everything, it's still, I think it's going to endure the test of time, and, hopefully the series doesn't die a slow, agonizing death.
Yeah, but I mean, hopefully Kojima's allowed to work on other titles at some point in his career, just to keep him fresh for these games.
Yes, I really hope Konami doesn't beat this to death like it has, before, so... Alrighty, well, if you have any questions, comments, anything else you want to add, talk about Metal Gear, this episode, any other episode, you can leave your feedback at facebook.com/downloadable content, or you can do so on Twitter at DLContent. So once again, I would like to thank Ron and Solid Snake for being on this episode. And on that fun note, have a good one, everyone.
Ta to see